record it? Okay, because I'm paranoid, so. Okay, good evening. Hello, my name is Monica Elliott. I'm president of the Broward League of Women Voters. The only thing I want to remind people of before I turn it over to Joan Sternberg is to remind everyone that if you are in Congressional District 20 or State Senate 33 or State House 94 districts, there is an election after Christmas on January 11th. And vote by mail ballots were being sent out this week. So if you have requested a vote by mail ballot, that should be coming in the mail shortly. We did a candidate forum last night for the Congressional District 20, and that's currently on our Facebook page. And then we will be doing a candidate forum for the Senate and House seats on next Thursday, December 16th at 6 p.m. And we're going to be doing that again with the Young Professional Network at the Urban League, which is a really great group to work with. So now I will turn it over to Joan.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and thank you. I'm glad that everybody was able to get in, and I guess we'll see some other people shortly when they figure it out. Linda and I want to thank you for participating in our general meeting tonight, focusing on the current state of healthcare in Florida. As you're aware, the state recently passed into law 4 bills regarding masking and vaccinations against COVID. We are lucky to have the indefatigable Kathy Winn with us tonight to explain them. She attended every session. Kathy has a very extensive and impressive CV, but I'll just give you a few of the highlights. She is an FSU grad and has a master's in public health from USF. Formerly, Kathy worked for 23 years with the Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services and was a program administrator for the primary care office. After retiring from the state in 2005, Kathy joined the League of Women Voters in Tallahassee and currently serves as the chair of the Healthcare Committee, and she's active in Lobby Corps. So Kathy, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing everything that you gleaned a few weeks ago about the special sessions.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. You know, this helped me look back over these laws and try to figure out what might have happened since they were passed and signed by the governor on November the 18th. Okay, so I want to thank you because it got me going to look and see what everybody's done since the laws were passed. I would like to share the screen and pull up a PowerPoint presentation that I zipped out so that you guys don't have to look at me all the time. Let's see if I can find the right one. Here you go. Okay. There we go. There are just 10 slides here. It was called a special session 2021B. The regular 2021 session is called 2021A, and we're looking forward to 2022 now, and it'll just be called 2022 for a while, okay? So when you're looking up the special session on the website, it's 2021B. And these 2 little highlights down here, preventing employer vaccination mandates and strengthening parent rights concerning student mask wearing, were the 2 major goals of the legislative special session from the perspective of the governor. And the special session was called pursuant to a proclamation that he signed. There's no date on the proclamation, but it's important that you might want to look at that proclamation because it'll come in handy when you start talking about what happened during the session. Go on to the next slide. Here are the 4 identical sets of Senate and House bills that were proposed, House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2, House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 4, they're identical. And the reason they're identical is because they don't want to have to go through a lot of changes, because going through changes and amendments means going back and forth between the houses of the legislature, and that means they can't get them passed easily. So they got 4 Senate and 4 House bills that are identical going on. The most important one of these 4 sets of bills is this first one, House Bill 1B and Senate Bill 2B. Okay, so we're going to talk mostly about them, but I will also tell you about the other ones. This one is like 16 pages long, so you know it has a lot of stuff in it, and we'll be talking about that. If you have questions, just like raise your hand or do something, or we can ask them afterwards too. Okay, House Bill 1B and Senate Bill 2B. Okay, the major real emphasis in House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2 was the section on prohibiting employers from requiring COVID-19 vaccinations. Okay, so this section prohibits employers from requiring those mandates without providing exemptions that allow employees to opt out. So you could say, here's your opt-out reasons: medical reasons, including anticipated pregnancy, which is not defined in the bill; religious reasons; COVID-19 immunity, which, by the way, is not recognized by the federal government as any reason to opt out of a vaccination mandate because it's unreliable; periodic testing; and use of personal protective equipment. So if your employer requires you to do a vaccine, that get vaccinated, here are the reasons you can opt out of that vaccination. Now, if your employer has a vaccination mandate and they say that you cannot opt out for one of these reasons, then they are subject to administrative fines. If they have more than 100 employees, the fine is $50,000 per violation. In other words, for each person that says you violated my opt-out options. For under 100,000 employees, it's 10,000 people per violation. Now that's just section 1 of the bill, but that's the most important thing that the whole bill decided to do. And that's the one where, when we were watching the testimony, all the anti-vaxxers showed up saying that, you know, you're taking away my personal freedom to not get vaccinated, and you're ignoring all of the solutions to this problem other than vaccinations, which include taking medications that may or may not be efficient at handling the COVID-19 infection. So that's section 1. Section 2 prohibits COVID-19 vaccination mandates for students. Any educational institution cannot impose a COVID-19 vaccination mandate for any student. And here is how they define educational institution: public and charter schools, state universities, state colleges, which means community colleges. Sorry, I just dropped my phone. Developmental research schools, Florida School for the Deaf and Blind, and Florida Virtual School. So that's what an educational institution means. So if you're an educational institution, you cannot have a COVID-19 vaccination mandate for students. Section 2. Section 3 prohibits public employee COVID-19 vaccination mandates. So any educational institution or a governmental entity may not impose a COVID-19 vaccination mandate for any full-time, part-time, or contract employee. And if you do that as a public institution, you can get a fine of $5,000 per violation. And employees terminated based on non-compliance with a vaccine mandate that is not allowed under law are eligible for reemployment assistance under the state unemployment statutes. Okay,
Kathy?
so
I'm going to interrupt
Yeah.
because Linda Bloomfield has her hand up.
Yeah, I
okay,
just to clarify, you're talking about state public employees, not federal public employees. Is that correct?
that's correct. It's a
Okay, I
state
thought so.
law. It's a state law. It has to do with public employees, which I assume means state employees, local government employees.
Okay, thank you. I thought so, but just to make sure everybody understood that.
Yeah, and the same section talks all about how employees terminated for non-compliance with a vaccination mandate can get reemployment assistance. And they also can, they don't have to be reassigned. If they're reassigned to a position, for example, that they don't, that's as dangerous as the one that they think is dangerous enough to be objecting to a mandate, they can still get reemployment assistance. So there's just no leeway in these laws for anybody to really enforce a vaccination mandate. That's one thing you'll notice about these laws. They were crafted by some people who know how to do this, okay? They know the loopholes. Okay, Section 4, interestingly, appropriates $5 million to the Department of Legal Affairs, which is in the Attorney General's office, by the way. I didn't know where it was located, for complaint investigation activities. So if I complain that you have not allowed me to opt out of a vaccine mandate, if I complain that you have not allowed me to do that, and I file a complaint with the Department of Legal Affairs, this money will pay for the investigation activities by the Department of Legal Affairs to resolve that issue. And if they resolve it in your favor, then the employer's going to pay $50,000 or $5,000 or $10,000, depending on who they are. And then it's for taking legal action to stop the enforcement of COVID-19 vaccination mandates imposed by the federal government. So this is money that's appropriated so that we can fight President Biden's vaccination mandates also. $5 million. That's all Section 4 does. Section 5 is the one that gets the school districts for requiring face coverings, okay? And it also, it requires a student to wear a face, says they may not require a student to wear a face covering. They can't prohibit a student from attending school or being on school grounds or going to school-sponsored activities. You can't subject a student to restrictions, put them in a special room or put them down the hall or put them in the corner of the classroom based on COVID exposure, nor can you prohibit an employee from returning to work or restrict the employee or disparately treat the employee based on COVID-19 exposure or symptoms. Okay, that's what all the sections do. Now, in this Section 5, where it talks about school districts, school boards, superintendents, local appointed or elected officials, or school board employees, it only relates to students. So a local official, you would think, could have a mask mandate, right? Because this only speaks to students, and there's no other place in the law in 1A or House Bill 1 or Senate Bill 2 where it talks about face coverings. So you think, well, maybe a local appointed or elected official can require a mask mandate if they're not talking about a student. But my husband pointed out to me, and he used to be a state employee. In fact, he used to be commissioner of education. So he knew a lot about this lawmaking system and how it worked really well. And he pointed out that last year, they passed a law, Senate Bill 2006, that said the governor can over locally declared mandate that affects the personal liberties of the people. So the governor can override any mandate that the local public officials produce. So, you know, this pretty much covers everything. It pretty much covers everything. So if anybody doesn't have any questions about this first one, we'll go on to the other three, and then we can talk about what happened after they proposed them all. Okay, so let's see if we can go to 8. This, the second set of bills, 2B and 3B, we're dependent on the passage of the first bill, because all they do is say that the records that have to do with employee complaints alleging private employers' violation of COVID-19 vaccination policies, those records are exempt from public review. Okay. Okay. It includes all information held by the Department of Legal Affairs pursuant to an active investigation. So anytime anybody's investigating any complaints that have to do with those vaccine mandates by employers or anybody else probably, that information is all exempt from public examination. So there won't be any local newspapers suing for or asking for information under a Freedom of Information Act, because that's what this does. It keeps all that information private. Now, I want to tell you that I was in that hearing, and Representative Geller, I believe he's a representative from your area, right? He actually didn't have a big problem with this. He didn't have a big problem with these sets of laws, but he thought, of course, that they should exempt any kind of personal identifying information, and he was going to make an amendment to that effect when the bill came up before the Senate. But I didn't hear an amendment suggested. So there may have been people that didn't really object to this particular bill because it is protective of people's information. That's all this bill does. Okay. All right. The next set of bills, 5B and 6B. This is the one that creates Florida's own Osha plan so that we can have our own plan to govern employers and public government officials with regard to occupational safety and health. So this appropriates $1 million for the state of Florida to develop a proposal. The Executive Office of the Governor is going to ask a bunch of state agencies to submit a proposal to him to the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House by January 17th, 2022. And the only problem that's wrong with this whole shenanigan is that if you look at the Osha website, it reveals that the usual time to develop a state plan, Florida's own state plan, would take at least 2 years to have it written and approved and be consistent with federal regulations. So if they're trying to get out of going by the federal regulations with regard to occupational safety and health, which is how President Biden mandated the mandatory vaccination requirement for employers over 100 employees, was through an emergency rule that OSHA put out concerning occupational health and safety. That's how it was done. To spend 2 years developing this state plan wouldn't impact our situation here in Florida at all. So to use this as an opportunity to get out of any federal regulations wouldn't be very effective. So it's kind of an interesting situation, you know. And if you think the Biden administration is going to be gung-ho to approve Florida's state plan, if it wants to be less restrictive than the federal one, I don't think you're being very realistic. But anyway, that's what this does. And they passed this law. So they're going to be doing something. And finally, the only thing that 7B and 8B, House Bill 7B and Senate Bill 8B does is removes the word vaccinations as one of the things that the state health officer can order pursuant to a public health emergency. So the state health officer can declare a public health emergency, and before this law was passed in November, they could require somebody to get a vaccination. They could order somebody to do that. They could also order them to be examined, tested, treated, isolated, or quarantined. And they could use any means necessary to treat the individual who has a communicable disease that has significant morbidity or mortality and presents a severe danger to public health. Okay, so now the word vaccination is no longer in there. But several legislators, when this was being discussed, said, well, doesn't treatment include vaccination? So there would likely be some interesting discussion about whether or not the state health officer could still order somebody to get a vaccination if it's considered treatment. So that's what these bills do. Okay. So after these bills were proposed, what happened was we went down to watch the sessions where they talked about these bills. Okay, and I will tell you that I only saw one amendment proposed to any of these bills the whole time that they were in committees. And they only went to very few committees. The Senate sent the bills to the Health Policy Committee, which many of you are familiar with. The Health Policy Committee looks at all kinds of health-related bills. And then it went straight from there to appropriations and then straight to rules, which means straight to the Senate, basically. They could put it on the special order calendar and it was heard by the Senate. All right. The House bill went to the Commerce Department of all Commerce Committee, and then I think went straight to rules. But I did not hear one single amendment to any of the proposed legislation except one really tiny technical amendment in the House that straightened out one of the statutory references. Okay, that's the only amendment that I heard during the committee meetings. Usually in a committee meeting, what you hear are people discussing the bills and suggesting amendments, and then they vote the amendments up or down, and they change the bill, and that means it has to go from one house in the legislature to the other and be accepted by the other one, back and forth like that. Well, that didn't happen because they only had 4 days. So they didn't have time to do a lot of amending and require people to study so that they knew what amendments were being proposed and so forth and so on. So what happened was the Senate picked up the House bills and said, now these are the committee substitutes for the Senate bills, because the House had already voted on the bills and said these are good. Okay, so the House voted them and sent them over to the Senate. The Senate met on Wednesday morning. Oh, good grief. Let me turn this off. Sorry about that. And so then the Senate took them up, and there was a lot of amendments that were attempted by mostly Democrats who opposed to the bills. Most of the time they got told that the amendment that they proposed was not in line with the proclamation that the governor signed. So they wouldn't take up the amendments at all. On the few that they did take up, they voted them down by voice vote, is what I recall. Now, they may have voted by pushing the buttons, but none of them, no amendments were accepted to any of these bills. Okay, so they just flew through, and the governor signed them, I think, on Thursday, the 18th, was after the bills were passed by the Senate, I think on the 17th. So there you have what happened, okay, after they were proposed and supposedly went through committee meetings and then were approved by the Senate, passed by the Senate, and then signed by the governor into law. And so after that, I guess I need to spend 5 minutes telling you what was involved in the implementation of the bills after they were signed. Part of the things that's the provisions that are in the first bill, House Bill 1B, Senate Bill 2B, includes that the Department of Health will develop emergency rules within 15 days of the passage of the bill, okay, to specify the standards for those exemptions to the vaccination mandates. Remember the exemptions that we talked about? The medical exemption, the religious exemption, okay. So they had 15 days to develop emergency rules to address and to develop those forms that the employers fill out, the employees fill out to give to their employees saying that they had an exemption. Remember that? Okay. Well, okay, so the rules had to be developed by the Department of Health within 15 days. And also the Department of Economic Opportunity, which is the people that oversee the unemployment compensation people, you know, the people that you go to when you get fired from your job and you want to get unemployment. That's the Department of Economic Opportunity. They had 15 days to develop rules for all the stuff that had to do with how you collect unemployment if your employer fires you because you didn't get vaccinated. So they had 15 days to develop those rules. And then lastly, the Department of Legal Affairs in the Attorney General's office had 15 days to develop rules for the fines that were going to be levied if you were found to be in violation of the vaccination requirements, either by public officials or the employers. Okay, so they had to develop all the rules on how that was going to be handled and how they were going to conduct investigations into the when an employee filed a complaint to the Department of Legal Affairs saying that my employer didn't give me an opt-out and I was supposed to get one. So the Department of Legal Affairs had 15 days to develop emergency rules on all that, how that was going to happen. Economic Opportunity had 15 days and Department of Health had 15 days. Well, I got the Department of Health rule, emergency rule. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. Here's the Department of Health rule. I don't know if you can read this, but let's just talk for just a minute about, for example, if you said I need a medical exemption because I'm going to become pregnant. Here are the standards for an exemption, for filing an exemption. The employee intends to become pregnant and the employee is of childbearing age. So the point here is that it's not very stringent, and this rule is not very stringent. Okay, it only says that you had to submit a medical exemption. All you have to do is fill out the form, and submit the form. And that's what it says. And here's to claim an exemption based on religious reasons, which may include a sincerely held moral or ethical belief. An employee must present a completed religious exemption form. An employer shall not inquire into the veracity of the employee's religious beliefs. And there's no backup information required to submit for a medical exemption or a religious exemption. The only exemption that requires any backup information other than the form completed by the employee or the medical person is the one that talks about COVID-19 immunization by virtue of having already had COVID-19. So I will show you, this is the rule. It's pretty short and you may have trouble finding it because I had a time finding it. I had to go to the Department of State and go round and round to try to find it. So if you're interested in it, I'll send it to you electronically so you can read it. What's interesting is I contacted the Department of Economic Opportunity and they said they had nothing to do with developing rules. Even though it says in this law that just passed that they would have 15 days to develop an emergency rule. They said they didn't have to do that. And they referred me to the Department of Legal Affairs. Okay, so then I called the Department of Legal Affairs and they sent me to the consumer helpline. And I told them what I wanted to know. This was yesterday morning. And they said they would have to get back with me. And I haven't heard anything since then. So the only one that's filed any emergency rules, even though they only had 15 days to do it, is the Department of Health. And if you go on the website of the Department of Health, the front page of the Department of Health, it has the whole first page covers the exemption forms that you need if your employer is requiring you to get a vaccination and you need an exemption. The forms are right there on the front page. The rule is not there. I'm going to show you the rule or one of the forms. Let me see here. So you can see what the form looks like. Let's see. Which is the form? Maybe this one. Okay, let's see. Okay, here's the basic medical exemption form. All right, see here this little box that you check where it says yes right here in this first section, the first section where it says yes. You check that if this exemption is on the basis of pregnancy or anticipated pregnancy. Then this is the part that just has the physician sign to say that the COVID vaccination is not in the best interest of the employee. Okay, no, as far as I can tell, no background information is required to be submitted with this form. So if there is no background information and the doctor signs this form, how is the employer supposed to know on what medical basis the physician made that decision in order to be able to turn that request down? I think that the way they've created these forms has made it almost impossible for anyone to dispute the exemption that they're submitting. The other forms are very similar to this. You can go on the Department of Health's main websites right there on the front page. The only one that requires any backup is the one that talks about immunization by virtue of having had COVID. The rest of them are just a form that's like this that is signed off on. So now, okay, so if we are looking at this, what it does say is that immediately after they do these emergency rules, they have to start promulgating regular rules that concern these bills and the implementation of this law. Now, when you do regular vaccination, when you do regular rules, you know, one of the requirements is that they allow for public comment. And they would have to incorporate these forms by virtue of being considered part of this rulemaking process. So there may be an opportunity for us down the line to comment on these rules once they become regular rules that are promulgated in the normal rule promulgation process, which is why I wanted to thank you when I started this discussion, because it's forced me to try to find these rules and to follow up on these rules and to see if there will be an opportunity for us to say these forms are ridiculous and they don't give anybody an opportunity to see on what basis this person gained a medical exemption. So I don't even know why they would need the second set of bills, the second bills that talked about exemptions from public records. The only thing that there's a record of right here, right now, with these forms appears to be the person's name and the name of the doctor, which I guess, you know, some people would want to retaliate against that doctor, or maybe, you know, publicize the name of that person that was getting the exemption. But there's no way that, I don't see how a hearing officer, if they're looking at this case, would have any ability to judge whether or not the person was eligible for an exemption or not. There would be no backup information that I can see with this, with the single exemption of that exception of that exemption for COVID-19 status. That's the only thing I can see. So it's really interesting to see how this was implemented so far. And I encourage you to go on the Department of Health website and look at all the forms. There's also a place on that same website where a public, where a person, a public employee can file, where you can go to file a complaint against a public agency that's trying to impose a vaccine mandate. So they've got a link directly to a complaint by a public agent or against a public agency right there. They don't have the similar link to an employer who's proposing a vaccine mandate, but they do have a link right on that spot. So I encourage you to read the front page of the Department of Health's website on the implementation of this legislation that just passed. And that's all I have to say about that right now.
Okay, and I'll just mention that Linda Bloomfield put the website for the floridahealth.gov in the chat, so you can easily look at that.
Yeah.
So I have one question. It's kind of, I mean, it's all scary what they've done. There's no doubt about that. But the fact that they are giving this power to the state medical officer to do whatever is necessary to contain the next epidemic, and especially when we're dealing with one that seems very unqualified. I mean, we're dealing with what's happening now with COVID-19, but who's to say there's not going to be something else that pops up? And it's just scary. You're muted, Kathy.
Are in the background, so I don't know what you're hearing.
We're hearing.
I hope you're not hearing anything bad. But anyway, yeah, that's very interesting. And I think if it were, and this all sounds very partisan, but I don't know how you can avoid being partisan against these bills if you are following science and trying to do what science tells us we should do. But this bill that they passed last year, and I wasn't really paying attention last year, but this bill really, it says the governor can override any emergency mandate that any public official is doing if they consider it to be in violation of people's personal freedom, basically. To me, that's almost worse than any of these, you know, or at least as bad. So we just, we need to, and people they have challenged that law in court. That's why the counties that were opposed to the governor's orders on the school mask mandates, that was the basis of their legal objection, I think, was the fact that the governor's probably overstepped his authority, you know. I don't know.
And now he wants to create a civilian military force to enforce these laws. This is like, I know I sound like a broken record, but you know, this is exactly what the Gestapo was.
It feels like that. I would like to hope that we don't ever get to the point where the governor's using a civilian police force to implement the riot bill that was passed last year or anything else. I mean, I always go down to the legislature with I try to go with the position that these people that are our representatives are doing what they think is in our best interest. And that we should always try to give them the benefit of the doubt. And also be very respectful when we talk to them about anything that has to do with what we think is right and what they think is right. Because they are our elected officials. And just like we expect people to respect the president and other elected officials, we need to do that with our local representatives too. But it does get kind of hard when you kind of see all that stuff kind of being tied together. Yes, it gets difficult.
So we've got a couple questions. I think, Colleen, did you have your hand up? Okay, Stephanie Pearson has a question. Are the federal regulations still in place? And does that take precedent over what the state has done?
Any federal legislation takes precedence over state legislation. Okay, it doesn't matter what the topic is. Now, there have been, and you guys probably know this better than I am, the latest thing is that the Miami Court of Appeals, I think it's District 11, that's Miami, has said that the employee mandate can hold. Okay, so but appeals courts in, is it Texas, has said that it doesn't hold. And that's the one that was done pursuant to the lawsuits that were proposed by a number of states against the vaccination mandate as an overstep of the federal government's constitutional authority, I guess you might say, or even legislative authority. So I think it's a mixed bag right now. And the one that had to do with the lawsuit has stayed enforcement of the federal vaccine mandate, I believe, on both the employers and employees over 100 under the Osha regulations, and the healthcare employees under the CMS, Center for, the CDC mandate. So I think we're pretty much screwed, to use a non-polite term, with regard to vaccine mandates. But you know what? With all these exemptions, it just seems to me that it's even easier for an employer to impose a vaccine mandate, because look at all the ways people can get out of it. So maybe it's, it may have some of the people that came to testify said it actually has the opposite effect of what they wanted to do. And the reason they were so upset was because people like Disney, from what I can tell, and you read the articles in the newspaper, were being ridiculous. I mean, they weren't allowing very many exemptions. And, people were getting really upset about the fact that, there was no exemption, period. And people were getting treated badly by Disney, from what I read. So maybe this law actually allows people to get out of being vaccinated, but it still lets the employers say, you have to get mandated, you have to get vaccinated. It's just, you can get out of it by all these ways, but maybe people won't want to take the time to get out of it by all these ways. Maybe that's too much work for them. Maybe they just rather go get vaccinated. So I think, we have to look at it as maybe being something that might backfire, because the people, the anti-vaxxers, wanted them to have no exemptions and just say you could not require vaccination mandates like they did to the public officials. Public officials get no exemptions. Public employees get no exemptions. They just can't require a vaccine mandate, period, for public officials, for public employees. No exemptions. Just no mandate. No mandate, period.
Okay, so just one more question and then we'll wrap it up for the evening. Denise is asking, have there been any legal challenges to these 4 laws, to these new laws that the state just passed?
If there have been, I don't know about them.
I haven't heard anything.
Okay. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for attending. I certainly learned a lot because you just read in the paper and things get pretty mixed up. And I think you made it very clear, Kathy, as to what have been these 4 laws. So we really appreciate that. So have a good evening, everyone. And we will see you for our general meeting in next year. But do remember that if you are in those state or House districts or Congressional District 20, we've got an election coming up and we have our candidate forum for the state offices next Thursday. So thank you very much and have a great evening.
Kathy. Thank you,
Thank
Kathy.
you, ladies.
Kathy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
for
your
everything, Kathy.
attention.
Bye-bye.